So way back in the year of our Lord 1639 in our fair city, Boston, Massachusetts, there lived a tailor by the name of Robert Kane. And by any modern standard, this Robert Kane fellow would have been considered both a shrewd businessman and just a really good person. His haberdashery down there on State Street was flourishing, and he was making a tidy profit for both himself and his family. Robert Kane was also exceedingly devout. He was a member in good standing at the First Congregational Church in Boston. He never missed a Sunday services, and he gave generously to the church's ministries. In short, he was the kind of person that many of us would want our kids to grow up to be like, if not the kind of person that we ourselves would want to be. So, it may surprise you to learn that in 1639, the elders of the First Congregational Church in Boston saw fit to hold a special meeting into which they called this Robert Kane. And they called him in order to admonish and discipline him. Now, why did they do that? They did that because 3 or 4 years earlier, these elders had decided that Christians should sell their wares for no more than a 4% markup. However, it came to light that Mr. Kane was selling his wares for a 6% markup. And so they called him into this specially convened meeting in order to discipline and admonish him for the sin of greed. So where did they come up with that 4% number? Is it from somewhere in the Old Testament? Nope. Is it from something that Jesus said in the New Testament? No, it is not. Is it something from one of Paul's letters? Not a chance. No, that 4% figure was a completely arbitrary number. The congregation of the First Congregational Church basically got together and said, in our place and time, Boston, Massachusetts, 1639, charging anything more than 4% means that you're greedy, and anything under that, you're fine. It's a line in the sand that they themselves came up with. Now, whereas from our modern perspective, the perspective of people who live in a Google, Facebook, Amazon ad-driven, internationally connected economy, whereas from our perspective, the idea of drawing a stark line in the sand like that might seem crazy, if not an impossible thing to do. From the perspective of this morning's reading, defining greed in such a simple and concrete way was a very, very, very smart thing to do. Now, in this morning's reading from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 6, Jesus lays out for us in short order 4 distinct teachings about our relationship to our possessions in general and to our money in particular. And if you were paying really close attention, it might have sounded a bit like Jesus was playing a game of one of these things is not like the others. Because 3 of these 4 teachings are very straightforward. They make sense to us on an intuitive level. They're just easy for us to understand. Jesus opens up by saying, where your treasure is, here the desires of your heart will also be. That's the first teaching. Where your money goes, your heart will follow after it. No problems there. Really easy to understand. He then goes on to say that a person cannot serve 2 masters because you'll come to love one and hate the other. Therefore, Jesus says, you cannot serve both God and money. Again, very straightforward stuff, easy for us to understand. He then wraps up the section of teaching by saying, do not worry about a thing. Do not worry about your everyday life. Because if God takes care of the birds flitting around in the sky, who do nothing to prepare for the winter, how much more? How much more is God going to take care of you? Yet again, a nice, easy to understand, feel-good little teaching there. But plunked down in the middle of these 3 teachings is a 4th teaching, isn't there? Jesus says, your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. Huh? What does that have to do with anything, let alone what does that have to do with money? Jesus here seems to be veering wildly off message. And while that does indeed appear to be the case, what I would like to suggest to us this morning is that of these 4 teachings about our relationship to our possessions and to our money, this one, this 4th one, this hard to understand one, is actually the most insightful. And while it's articulated in kind of a weird way, its meaning is actually pretty simple. So here's the basic idea of the teaching. It's that at this moment even, we are surrounded by all sorts of light. Light is streaming out of our iPhones and our Androids and our laptop screens. Light is pouring through the windows of our homes from our overhead lights and our lamps. Some of you are even outside right now, just soaking in the direct rays of the sun. And if our eyes are healthy, right, we're able to take that light into our bodies so that we're able to navigate around with ease. We can leave this room and enter that room. We can dodge our coffee table, no big deal. When our eyes are healthy, we can use our body as it's intended to be used. So there is a real sense in which if your eyes are healthy, your whole body is in fact filled with light. On the flip side of that, though, if our eyes are unhealthy, it doesn't matter how much light there is pouring out of our screens and in through our windows, we just can't take it into our bodies. So we're not able to navigate around as we should be able to, at least not without stubbing our pinky toes on our furniture, tripping over that coffee table. If you have little ones, maybe you'll step on some Legos. So in a very real sense, if our eyes are unhealthy, our whole bodies are filled with darkness. We're unable to use them as they are intended to be used. So in the context of money and things, what does this mean? Jesus here is pointing to the fact that greed and materialism are unique among human vices. Of all the many ways that we fall short of the glory of God in our day-to-day lives, greed and materialism are the only vices which are completely and utterly blind, to which rather we are completely and utterly blind. And so we can't navigate our way out of them. And the reason he says that is because all it takes for us to be blind to our own greed and to be blind to our own materialism is to be standing next to someone who is a little bit better off than we are, a little bit looser with their spending than we are, a little bit more into things and possessions than we are. And when we see that person, we're able to point at them and say, thank God I'm not like that person. They sure are greedy, aren't they? They sure are materialistic. But we're unable to see ourselves in that same light because our eyes are unhealthy. And this is true for people in every tax bracket. If you're making $200 a year, you're going to be pointing at the person making $2,000, saying, thank God I'm not materialistic like that person. If you make $20,000, you're going to be pointing at the person making $200,000. If you're a multimillionaire, you're going to be pointing at a billionaire saying, thank God I'm not greedy like that person is. Sadly for them, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg ain't got nobody to point to, but everybody else, we have this amazing capacity to lie to ourselves, to fool ourselves, and deny the fact that we ourselves are greedy and materialistic to one extent or another, and that money has an undue significance in our lives. And because we are blind to it, we can't and we don't do anything about it. I recognize, though, that this is a hard sell, especially if what Jesus is saying is actually true. And we are as blind to greed and materialism as he suggests that we are. So this morning, I'm not going to ask you to take my word on it, but rather I want to offer you this litmus test. Or I suppose it's actually a series of litmus tests, so that you can see for yourself if money and things have an undue significance in your own life. So here's a series of questions. You don't have to answer them aloud. They're simply for you to cogitate on. They're going to start off easy, and if I ordered them correctly, they should get progressively more uncomfortable for us to answer. That makes sense? All right, here we go. When you meet a rich person, and in the Boston area, that's a fairly easy thing to do. When you meet a rich person, are you immediately enthralled with that person? Do you take a keen interest in them and their life and all their great stuff? Their big house, nice car, fancy clothes. Are you enthralled by that person? Or, when you meet a rich person, do they intimidate you? Is there something about the fact that a person has a flush bank account that makes you stand in awe of them? Do you have the sneaking suspicion that the fact that they're rich somehow means that they're better than you? Or, when you meet a rich person, do you automatically dislike them? Do you by default just assume that they're a jerk, that they're corrupt and should not be trusted? And then at the other end of the spectrum, and this is the hardest question of them all because no good churchgoer would ever want to admit in public that they think like this. But when you meet someone who is not as well off financially as you, when you meet someone who is poor, maybe a homeless guy sitting on the street corner, do you think you are better than that person? Do you think that they don't work as hard as you do? That they're not as smart as you, not as well equipped as you? If you could answer yes to any of those questions, what that is telling you is that money is more to you than just money. Money is more to you than just something that you use to buy stuff. It has more significance in your life. And at this very moment, it's actively changing and warping the way that you view the world. It's actively changing and warping the way that you view the world around you. Your eye is unhealthy. That's what it's telling us. So what is the fix here? How do we go from having unhealthy eyes and bodies filled with darkness to having healthy eyes and bodies filled with light? How do we stop serving money and start serving God? How do we stop storing up treasure on earth and start storing up treasure in heaven? I'm afraid that the answer that I'm about to offer you is going to sound equal parts trite and predictable. But for as trite and predictable as the answer is, I think it also has the benefit of being actually true. And in any case, as a pastor, being trite and predictable is a big part of my job. So here it is. I believe that our first step toward getting healthy eyes and bodies full of light is simply to understand, on an intellectual level, to just simply understand the gospel story. Because at the heart of this whole thing that we're doing here Sunday after Sunday, we have this story about a God who loves us. A God who loves us so much, in fact, that God gives up being God, takes on flesh, and lives and suffers and dies. To what end? Well, the whole point of this gospel story is that through it, God is showing us what God treasures. And what does God treasure? Well, it looks a whole lot like you, and it looks a whole lot like me. In other words, what this story is telling us is that each of us, all of us, every single one of us, from the poor to the richest of the rich, already has significance. Right? We have significance because we are crazily, ridiculously, stupidly even loved by God. And if we can just get to a point where we really believe that's true, if we believe the truth of this story, then all of a sudden, right, We don't feel this need to amass money and things around us to feel more significant, more important, better than other people. All of a sudden, we don't feel the need to measure other people's significance by the money and the stuff that they have, because we can see with healthy eyes that their significance comes from the same place as ours does. From the fact that we are loved by God. Trite and predictable as this message is, I believe it's actually true. And my hope is that you and your greedy little heart might come to believe it too. Amen.